A new terror warning. ISIS releasing several disturbing propaganda posters threatening attacks over the holiday season. The latest targets, New Year's Eve. This comes a week and a half after an attempted suicide bombing in New York City. New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo has announced heightened security measures over the holidays, including increased personnel, bomb-sniffing dogs, and even radiation detectors. Joining us this morning is national security analyst at the Clarion Project, professor of counter-terrorism at Liberty University down in Lynchburg, Virginia, Ryan Mauro. Ryan, what do you make of this?
Well, of course, ISIS is going to be saying something like this. And for me, what the message should be is even if they were to succeed in carrying out an attack, the so-called lone wolf that doesn't actually exist, one guy goes off and he kills some people. Overall, they're still a bunch of losers. 96% of their caliphate has been destroyed. We need to start weaponizing Trump's trolling. I mean, make fun of them for how many dumb things that they do. And for a group that claims that Allah is blessing them and on their side, well, actually, it kind of looks like if their Allah exists, he's on our side because we're really killing them.
You know, Ryan, I think you make such a good point because as ISIS has lost ground in the Middle East, essentially what it's trying to establish is a cyber caliphate. And so it's trying to influence people who are crazy. A lot of these people who are lone wolf attackers don't really have a real attachment to terrorist groups overseas, as you know. And instead what they're trying to do is reach people who are angry, people who want to take that anger and hate out on people and then essentially get to them through the internet. But when you look at terror attacks in places like New York City, these lone wolf attacks, what's so difficult is trying to identify them ahead of time. So you have some 3,000 police officers patrolling down in the subway systems, for example, in New York each day. But what they're really having to be able to do is assess people. So how can people better be able to assess people, our officers and just people on the streets, to see if maybe they're, have those assessments in mind in case they see something and then they should say something?
Sure. Great question. Well, for the average civilian, it's just looking at something like a backpack that's placed somewhere, the kind of obvious things that make you uncomfortable reporting that type of thing. For law enforcement, I do a lot of training of law enforcement, and what I'll teach them is look for these dramatic overhauls in someone's personality, because that's what the radicalization process looks like. Obsession. They become obsessed with the ideology. They usually start alienating their friends and family because they become real judgmental. But I would say that when you look into the backgrounds of these folks, yes, they may not initially have connections to a terrorist group per se, but they will have connections to a supposedly nonviolent extremist movement. You look far back into where these initial ideas kind of incubate, and you'll see connections to groups around the world that are considered moderate by comparison, but still radical and repulsive. And that's where I think our attention should lie. And that's why I think that Congress really needs to investigate how the Obama administration impeded counterterrorism investigations and prosecutions, because that's the foundation where this begins. It's not about political points. It's about figuring out where these mistakes were made and going back and fixing them.
One of the things that happened a few years ago was the New York Police Department, which had a good intelligence operation. Then politically they thwarted it. Is that back up to full speed again?
Not really, because what happens is when something like that occurs, you influence the culture. And so you can still have some investigations that are going level, but those specific programs that were shut down, even if you were to revive them, it was surveillance of
Muslim communities and mosques, just trying to figure out if there was a would-be terrorist, where the individual was working, where the individual might be living basically in secret. But do you think New Yorkers are angry? New Yorkers are angry that in 14 months we've had 3 terror attacks, 8 people killed over near the West Side Highway on a bike path. And then after the fact, they put up concrete barricades, some of which are decorated for Christmas. Right. People are irritated. They're angry. They're, you know what? And what is New York going to do about it?
Well, there were a few different programs that were conflated, but the biggest amount of lying that went on in the media and also pushed by certain activist organizations was this idea that the NYPD was just spying on Muslims for simply being Muslim. If you look at the stuff that real resources were put into, there were always indications of extremism, such as classes on how to disarm police if you get into a fight with cops. Right. That's a sign of extremism. Start there. Believe it or not, those type of indicators are all over the place, and that's where you start. And if you look at this as an ideological insurgency, not a criminal intelligence problem, not even a terrorism problem, but an ideological insurgency, and you say, what is the infrastructure for this problem? Start there. You'll find the bad guys. It just requires some political incorrectness.
Ryan, good to see you. Thank you so much. Ryan Mauro, again, be vigilant.